In a shocking interview, Axl Rose, the lead vocalist of Guns N' Roses, opened up for the first time about the complex and turbulent relationships throughout his music career, particularly with Kurt Cobain and Nirvana. The feud between Guns N' Roses and Nirvana was once one of the most iconic symbols of the musical shift in the 90s, when grunge clashed with glam metal. In this conversation, Axl not only reflected on the conflicts with Cobain, but also expressed deep regret over what transpired between them, while acknowledging the significant impact Kurt Cobain's death had on his own life. Axl's revelations about the shift in his perspective over the years, as well as his struggle with ego and past wrong decisions, have led fans and critics to ponder the previously unseen aspects of the story between these two rock legends. If you found this story interesting and want to learn more about these surprising and inspiring journeys, don't forget to like, share this video, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss out on the exciting content to come. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your opinions on these life-changing decisions. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video. The meeting was initially meant to promote Guns N' Roses' upcoming tour, but Rose quickly shifted to unexpected territory. Everyone thinks they know what happened between Kurt and me, but the real story is much more complicated and much worse than anyone realizes. The feud between Guns N' Roses and Nirvana has been well documented over the years. Initially, Axl had great admiration for Nirvana, even wearing their hat in the Don't Cry video. However, things began to change when Cobain repeatedly rejected Axl's offers to collaborate. The relationship reached its peak during the explosive confrontation at the 1992 MTV Video Music Awards. According to Rose, what we know so far is just the tip of the iceberg. "People think I'm just an arrogant guy who can't handle rejection," he said clearly and emotionally. "The truth is, I desperately tried to connect with Kurt because I recognized something in him that scared me." Axl admitted that he saw where Kurt was heading and wanted to help pull him back from the brink. In perhaps the most shocking revelation, Rose claimed that his infamous 1992 stage incident in Orlando was not the brutal attack people thought it was. He couldn't control his emotions, and what happened that night was beyond his control. At the Orlando show, Rose called Cobain a junkie and said he had a drug-addicted wife, suggesting that they would end up in prison if their child was born with a disability. Rose explained that he had just hung up the phone with a mutual friend who had told him that Kurt had overdosed again. "I was angry. I was scared. And yes, I lost my temper in the worst possible way," Rose stated. "I regret those words more than anything I've ever said in my life." Rose explained that he tried to shock Kurt into seeking help, but ultimately, he became the villain in Kurt's story. The interview took place at Axl Rose's home in Malibu, a place vastly different from the chaotic environment where he once thrived. Rose's home reveals a man seemingly haunted by his past, surrounded by memorabilia from his 4-decade-long career. The mementos include platinum records and classic guitars. Rose appears more introspective than the erratic frontman who once dominated headlines. Looking back, Rose says, "Now I can see where everything went." He then pointed to a framed photo from the early 90s, when both he and Kurt were at the height of their fame. Both of them struggled with the attention in different ways. Rose acted out by showing up late or walking off stage, while Kurt withdrew and fell deeper into addiction. Rose says, "We were both crying for help, just in completely different languages." He admits that they couldn't understand each other during that time. The differences in how they reacted to and dealt with pressure created a significant distance between them. However, Rose still feels a deep sense of empathy for Kurt. He acknowledges that both of them were caught up in personal issues and could only cry for help in their own ways. Rose also mentioned the altercation at the 1992 MTV Video Music Awards, where the tension between the bands reached its peak. This tension followed after Courtney Love mocked him and asked if he wanted to be the godfather of their child. That night turned into a series of confrontations, including Duff McKagan and Chris Novoselic nearly getting into a fight. Members of Guns N' Roses attempted to disrupt Nirvana's performance, but in the end, it only resulted in a complete disaster. This situation further strained the relationship between the two bands, making it difficult to repair. That night at the VMAs was a complete disaster. Rose admitted that when Courtney Love made the comment about becoming the godfather of Frances Bean, it wasn't just a random jab. She knew exactly what she was doing. Rose said, "I had tried to reach out to Kurt privately about getting clean, and it felt like she was mocking something that was really important to me." What makes Rose's revelation particularly striking is his claim that he tried to organize an intervention for Cobain through mutual friends in the industry. "I've seen too many talents self-destruct," Rose explained. "I witnessed friends die because of the demons clearly haunting Kurt." "So, yes, I did reach out to people that we both trusted to try to arrange a meeting away from the cameras," Rose continued. According to Rose, his concern for Cobain went beyond their musical rivalry and stemmed from his own struggles with substance abuse and mental health. "We were more alike than we wanted to admit," Rose reflected. "But while I survived my demons, I could see Kurt being consumed by his." Rose recognized the pain in Cobain's eyes because he had seen it in his own reflection. Rose revealed that during Guns N' Roses' peak success, he struggled with severe mental health issues that were largely undiagnosed at the time. "People saw the anger, the no-shows, the chaos, but they didn't see the panic attacks, the crippling depression," he said. "There were nights when I couldn't leave my hotel room because the thought of facing the crowd terrified me." Rose admitted, "When I looked at Kurt, especially in those final interviews, I saw the same terror, magnified 1,000 times." The interview took an even darker turn when Rose discussed something many fans didn't know. Rose revealed that Duff McKagan, the founding member of Guns N' Roses, was one of the last people to talk to Cobain. McKagan had sat next to Kurt on a flight from Los Angeles to Seattle just days before Cobain's suicide in April 1994. "When Duff told me about that flight, about how he almost invited Kurt over because he seemed so lonely," Rose paused. "I was clearly struggling with my emotions, and this has haunted me for many years." "We kept thinking, what if I had been on that plane instead?" Rose continued. "If I could have set aside our stupid feud and just talked to him as a person, could I have made a difference?" McKagan, who joined Rose for part of the interview, shared details about that fateful flight for the first time. "Kurt and I talked about recovery from addiction," McKagan explained. "He seemed interested in how I managed to stay sober after almost dying from pancreatitis in 1994. When we landed in Seattle, I thought about asking him to come over and maybe continue the conversation in a more private setting," McKagan said. "I remember thinking maybe I could help him, at least find a way for him to cope with life." Both Rose and McKagan were unable to escape the sense of regret about what could have happened. "That's a moment I can't forget," Rose added, his eyes reflecting a deep sense of remorse. "I didn't follow that instinct, and 3 days later, he was gone. And that's something I'll carry with me forever," Rose revealed, explaining that McKagan never fully recovered from that fateful encounter. Duff carried that burden for many years, still haunted by the idea that he was one of the last people to talk to Kurt, that he recognized something was wrong but didn't act on it. Rose continued, "None of us really got over what happened." This was one of the most surprising moments of the interview, where Rose admitted that Nirvana's musical criticism of Guns N' Roses had merit. "Kurt said we had nothing to talk about, and that hurt me because part of me wondered if he was right." Rose admitted, "They were changing music while we were becoming exactly the kind of rock stars we used to rebel against." "I didn't want to hear that truth at the time." Rose reflected on his journey from a hungry, street-smart rock musician to a stadium-filling superstar. "We started out as a kind of antidote to the hair metal scene, these truly raw outcasts making real music. We became this huge world, private jets, ridiculous, out-of-control egos," Rose said. "Kurt called us out on that, and instead of listening, I criticized." Rose's revelations sparked a backlash from fans of both bands, with many expressing shock at his newly found vulnerability. Others questioned his motives for speaking out now. Dave Grohl, Nirvana's drummer and now the frontman of Foo Fighters, has yet to publicly comment on Rose's statements. The interview revealed that Rose had tried to reach out to Grohl privately multiple times over the years in search of some sort of resolution. "Dave and I have had a few conversations," Rose admitted. "Nothing deep or dramatic, but enough to establish mutual respect." He added, "He's been through his own hell, losing not only Kurt, but also Taylor Hawkins recently. There's an unspoken understanding between us now beyond whatever expletive happened in the past." Music historian Elena Reynolds put the interview in the context of this feud. This feud has always been portrayed as a simple clash between glam metal and grunge, but Axl's revelations show it's much more than that, personal and complex. He seems to be genuinely struggling with regret and realizing that beneath all the public theatrics, there was a human connection that could have made a difference if pride hadn't gotten in the way. Reynolds pointed out that the feud between Guns N' Roses and Nirvana was often used as a symbol representing the shift in rock music in the early 90s. Guns N' Roses represented the excess of the 80s rock scene, while Nirvana epitomized the minimalist, rebellious spirit of grunge. Reynolds explained, "The clash was the perfect stage for a music industry undergoing a transformation." This feud was not just a rivalry between two bands, but part of a larger musical revolution, reflecting significant changes in both the culture and musical tastes of the 90s. It marked a clear break from the past, opening the door to a new era of music. Rose also mentioned the moment in 2016 when Grohl lent him the famous throne chair he used during performances after breaking his leg. Rose had broken his leg just before Guns N' Roses' reunion tour and used Grohl's throne to continue performing. "When Dave offered me to use that throne, it felt like a peace offering, not just between us, but also something Kurt would have appreciated. The irony was, I was actually sitting in something that Dave created, and it didn't make me feel at ease. In a strange way, it felt like closure to the throne incident." If this story has piqued your curiosity, be sure to hit the subscribe button so you won't miss any of our videos. Don't forget to share it with your friends and family so you can explore these surprising stories together. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. What do you think about personal change through cosmetic surgery? Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you in the next videos. The throne marked a public thaw in the relationship between Rose and the former members of Nirvana. Former Nirvana member Chris Novoselic even tweeted his support for Rose at the time, a significant shift from their near altercation at the 1992 VMAs. Rose also reflected on a legendary incident in rock lore, when Cobain allegedly spat on Elton John's piano at the MTV Awards, mistakenly thinking it belonged to Rose. "The story always makes me laugh," Rose admitted with a rare smile. "It's so perfect that Kurt did that." The final defiant gesture, however, missed its target. Rose told me about it years later, and we both agreed that it was strange and poetic. Here, Kurt was trying to attack what he saw as excess and fakery, and he ended up hitting one of the most legitimate artists in the history of music. Perhaps the most revealing part of the interview was when Rose discussed his reaction upon hearing the news of Cobain's death. "I was in a hotel room in New York when someone from our management team called to deliver the news. Rose recalled that his initial reaction was not sadness or shock, but anger. "I was angry at him for giving up, angry at myself for not trying harder to break through all the noise between us. It took me years to understand that anger was just grief and a disguise." Rose admitted that after Cobain's death, he spiraled into his own destructive behavior. "I didn't handle it well," he said. "The next few years were just a mess of bad decisions, isolation, and my own struggles with depression." In a way, Kurt's death was like a preview of my own disappearance from the public eye after the U.S. tour. Your virtual tour really ended after Guns N' Roses' Mammoth Tour used your virtual world tour in 1993. Rose became increasingly reclusive, eventually spending nearly 15 years working on the band's next album, Chinese Democracy. The album became notorious for its long production time and massive budget. "I completely withdrew," Rose explained, noting that part of it was due to his own mental health issues affecting him. "But I'd be lying if I said Kurt's death didn't affect my perspective on success, fame, and what really matters. I saw how quickly the world moved, how his pain became entertainment, and I didn't want to be part of that machine anymore." As the interview continued, Rose discussed how the media's portrayal of the feud had impacted his relationships with love and work. Frances has followed suit over the years. "I've never spoken directly to Frances," Rose admitted. "I've seen her at industry events, but I kept my distance out of respect for Courtney. We've had a few brief conversations over the years, nothing significant, but enough to show that we're both different now. People are more than we were in 1992. Rose revealed that he sent a private letter to Frances on her 18th birthday to apologize for the public comments he made about her parents. And expressed regret that she had grown up without her father. "I never expected a response, and I didn't get one," Rose said. "It wasn't to make myself feel better, but to acknowledge the harm my words may have caused her." The conversation shifted to how Rose's perspective on the rivalry with Cobain has changed with age. "In my 20s and 30s, everything felt like life or death," Rose reflected. "Awareness became a great betrayal at 63. I look back and see two young guys both drowning in their own ways, raging because they didn't know how else to deal with success. Neither of us were prepared." When asked if he believed things could have turned out differently if he and Cobain had sat down and talked honestly, Rose grew reflective. "I don't know," he said after a long silence. "Kurt's demons were so deep, and at that time, I was hardly in a position to save anyone," Rose admitted. "I could barely save myself. But sometimes I think about that alternate timeline, where we found common ground instead of feeding the media the story of this big rock rivalry." Music industry veteran Thomas Jensen, who worked with both bands in the early 90s, provides further context for Rose's revelations. What people forget is how isolated someone like Kurt or Axl becomes when they reach that level of fame, Jensen explained. Everyone around them has an agenda. Everyone wants something, and it's almost impossible to trust any motives in that environment. Approaching a perceived adversary would require a tremendous amount of vulnerability, something neither man was capable of at that time. When the interview ended, Rose was asked what he would say to Cobain if he could speak to him today. "I would tell him I'm sorry," Rose said without hesitation. "Sorry for not finding a better way to approach. Sorry for making it about my ego instead of his pain. And I would tell him that the world has been less interesting without him for the past 30 years. Rose also expressed regret about how the feud affected the other members of both bands. "Slash didn't want to be involved in any of this," Rose said with a sad smile. "He just wanted to play guitar," Rose said. "Dave and Christ lost their friend and bandmate, and yet here we are, nurturing this ridiculous story about which band was better or more authentic. In the end, none of it matters." Fans' reactions to Rose's revelations were swift and divided. Longtime Nirvana supporter Brian Goldby commented, "It wasn't a feud. Kurt thought Axl was a bad guy and didn't want anything to do with him, and that made Axl really sad." Others, like Chelsea Gusk, found it more humorous. "Kurt, I didn't want to be friends with him. Axl and I took it personally, and I don't care." Social media exploded with reactions to Axl's comments about Kurt becoming a global trend within hours of the interview's release. Many fans expressed shock at Rose's newfound vulnerability, while others remained skeptical about his motives for speaking out now. "I can't believe I'm saying this, but I actually feel bad for Axl Rose after reading this," one Twitter user expressed. Twitter user Nirvana Forever 90, who had spent decades portraying him as the villain in Kurt Cobain's story, wrote, "But maybe it's more complicated than that." Others were less impressed, with one commenting, "Axl, classic, turning someone else's tragedy into his own." Instagram user @GrungeQueen76 wrote, "Kurt didn't want anything to do with him for good reason. Axl represents everything Kurt was against." The interview reignited interest in both bands. With their streaming numbers reportedly skyrocketing overnight, music critics are now reassessing the infamous rivalry in light of Rose's revelations. Many have noted how time seems to have softened the once volatile frontman, but in the end, it looks like he won this decades-long feud. Perhaps Dave Grohl and Slash are the two most talented and least ego-driven, one fan pointed out. They shared a sentiment that many have echoed after Rose's confession. Cultural critic Nathan Williams views Rose's interview as part of a larger trend of aging rock stars confronting their legacies. "There's a reckoning happening with the surviving icons of the 80s and 90s, Williams observed. As they enter their 60s and 70s, many are looking back at their behavior during their peak years with a new perspective, and often regret. It's interesting to watch someone like Rose, who epitomizes the excess and instability of rock stars, struggle with his past actions so publicly." The interview also touched on how the music industry has changed since the height of the Guns N' Roses Nirvana feud. Back then, these rivalries sold magazines, concert tickets, and albums. Rose noted that the industry thrived on conflict because conflict was profitable. Now, with social media, artists can communicate directly with their fans without those filters. I wonder how different things would have been if Kurt and I could have communicated without all those barriers and agendas. Rose also reflected on how the perception of mental health issues has changed since the 90s. Back then, if you were struggling, the attitude was basically to tough it out. The public didn't have the understanding of these issues like they do today. Many people weren't aware that success doesn't always come with happiness. There's been a shift in how mental health is viewed in society and in the music industry. It's a big change that I think both Kurt and I went through. And sometimes, people like us weren't prepared to face it. The conversation about Axl Rose and Kurt Cobain's relationship is not just a musical story, but a profound lesson in understanding, regret, and what could have happened if we had transcended ego and pride. The recent revelations offer a fresh perspective on rock legends, showing that behind the fame and conflicts, there are human beings filled with pain, untold stories, and internal battles. We may not be able to change the past, but we can learn from those experiences to build a better future. Thank you for following and joining this journey. Keep seeking the truth, sharing, and experiencing music in a deeper way.